former residents of Lake Erie, South Bass Island, Put-in-Bay, Ohio, we often heard talk about World War II prisoners of war that were housed at Camp Perry in the Port Clinton area. So I began to explore these rumors and discovered that Camp Perry and its branch camps housed over 6,000 prisoners of war during World War II. My research led to a book and now a documentary that focuses on Italian and German prisoners of war that were stationed at Camp Perry and its branch camps. I found that the prisoners of war were meeting the labor shortages in the area farms and private industries. So now let us view and listen to a little-known piece of Ohio history. Enjoy the documentary, Dr. Jim Van Kuren.
Here come the unanticipated prisoners of war to Camp Perry near Port Clinton. First, the Italians started to arrive in October 1943, where they were given the opportunity to sign an agreement obligating them to change their allegiance to the American pursuit of the German army. Next, the Germans started to arrive in June 1944 with hardcore Nazis making every effort to control their fellow prisoners under the radar of American officers. In November 1944, the Germans became the sole occupiers of Camp Perry and its branch camps, with the Italians being transferred to the Rossford Ordnance Depot in Toledo and the Erie Proving Ground adjacent to Camp Perry. The United States started to receive prisoners of war in May 1942 when 32 Germans and 1 Japanese prisoner arrived. By May 1945, there were 425,871 prisoners of war housed in 511 base camps and 175 branch camps in every state except Montana, Nevada, and North Dakota. The influx of the prisoners of war caught the U.S. military officials unprepared to accommodate the number of inmates. The United States did not anticipate receiving thousands of prisoners of war that included Germans, Italians, and Japanese. If we only had received Italians and Japanese prisoners of war, the United States would have been able to handle the influx of the prisoners of war, but with the additional Germans, we found ourselves in a bind to accommodate the number of prisoners of war as seen in the chart, which illustrates the timeframe for prisoners of war coming to the United States, with the peak in June 1945 of 425,606 that consisted of 371,683 Germans, 50,273 Italians, and 3,915 Japanese, housed in 511 base camps and 175 branch camps. In June 1946, there were 32,000 prisoners of war on military and civilian work projects, which were terminated on June 15, 1946. The prisoners of war were repatriated by June 30, 1946, except 341 Germans, 29 Italians, and 1 Japanese serving sentences in United States penal institutions.
In the latter days of World War II, the Allies were racking up victories. Suddenly, hundreds of thousands of captured German soldiers began pouring into the U.S.
Large convoys are crossing the ocean with boatloads of war prisoners.
New York, the Statue of Liberty, the skyscrapers. I've never seen anything like this.
In the United States, the men are assigned to prominent prison camps scattered all over the country.
Commissioned officers in a mark, hence with the Geneva Convention, did not have to work and received $20 to $40 per month based on rank. Enlisted prisoners of war received $3 per month plus worked 8 hours a day. Selected.
When the prisoners of war reached the United States, they would undergo a rigid interrogation and review process before they were sent to their permanent prisoner of war camp. The United States Army followed the guidelines of the Provost Marshal General Office as to where the prisoners of war were to be sent based on nationality, type of prisoner, and camp. Once the German prisoners of war reached the United States, they were processed, not only being interrogated, but through a sequence of steps as seen in the photo, which shows an Iron Cross, second class, being removed from a prisoner's blouse, since the prisoners of war were allowed to retain their medals but not to display them, and the following photo shows German officers in line receiving their medals. were brought to the United States.
Well, we left there. We don't know what we're going. We only saw America when we arrived. I saw America and said, this is another world.
They were only young men when the war made them soldiers. They left their homes and their families behind, never imagining the future that awaited them.
You know me, you called me, but America gave me free energy.
Well, I had volunteered for the Africa Corps, which was a better chance than going to Russia. I was sent to Tunisia, which was a former French colony.
See, I was drafted in the Army to be a guard. That's what we were trained for from the time I went in till they busted us up.
The Geneva Convention states that the prisoners that were here, which were non-commissioned officers and enlisted men, could work on non-war related projects, which meant that they could work in the agricultural fields or the lumber industry or the rice fields.
Morning wake up was probably around 7, but probably breakfast at 8. Of course, we were assigned to work details. And so at 8 o'clock, for a while I worked on farms.
They were working, I believe they drawed something like 80 cents a day. I don't think they drawed it in money, but they drawed it in slips where they could spend it and buy stuff with it.
On their days off or when they weren't working, they would engage in all sorts of different activities. They started a school where they learned everything from history to English to foreign languages. They would do construction projects and build fountains, create statuary. They had painting classes. They had orchestras here to entertain themselves.
And then we were all Nazis. I was in Italy, he was from 14 to 18. And grew up in the Nazi doctrine. Hitler was the leader and all that stuff. But I was not very well liked by ardent Nazis. I spoke enough English to make myself understood. There were orders given what to do. I had to translate. When you're a prisoner of war, you have to make a decision. The power were the guards. And that took me through the whole 4.5 years of prison war camp because I made friends with guards, and by and large, it was always in my favor.
I'd say I was lucky to be a prisoner of war guard. We wasn't fighting overseas. When they busted up, see, I went to the infantry. And I don't talk much about that.
The layout plans illustrated 9-strand barbed wire fence 9 feet high enclosing the entire encampment, along with 13 guard towers. The accompanying photo shows the main gate of a prisoner of war camp with 2 guards and 2 German prisoners of war. The photo shows that the guard towers be 8 feet by 8 feet to allow for a machine gun, with the floor level being 8 feet above grade or a height that allowed for a clear vision of the fenced-in camp compound. With the advent of V-Day, POWs started to be shipped back home, which meant there would be a gap in man months, and there was concern on how the United States would fill the labor gap with over 400,000 deaths and 1 million wounded or seriously wounded soldiers returning home. Most concern were from the farmers who were losing cheap labor and not knowing how many local men would be returning home and would be able to work.
This was rural Ohio, and it's agriculture, so they were doing a lot of harvesting. And the German POWs there seemed to work real hard and had a good relationship with the farmers and the owners of that property. And they were very positive about the POWs. Came across one person who had said in 1970 she had gone to Germany to visit and was doing a tour. And the tour guide mentioned that he had been a POW in the United States. And she said, well, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. And he said, well, you know, I was really treated fairly at Camp Perry. And he said, I really have pleasant memories. Well, I think the pleasant memories stem from the fact they were fed well, they were clothed well, and they had the opportunity to get out of the camp and work. So it's really contrary to what RGIs experienced in Europe and in Japan.
Of Lieutenant Colonel E.C. McCormick Jr. and his staff at the base and branch camps was a fine balance of maintaining discipline while providing a positive camp environment, especially when you have two types of prisoners of war: jovial Italians and hardcore Germans. Makeup of Camp Perry originally housed only Italian prisoners of war, where the photo shows that they were moved to the west beyond the central office area, while Germans were housed adjacent to the athletic field, in 27 rows of 12 hutments each with 5 men per hutment with the mess halls, directly to the west of the hutments. The Camp Perry hutments were winterized with wood-burning stoves, had double walls and double-paned windows that housed 5 prisoners of war in a 256-square-foot area. Even though Italian service unit members are those who said that they would aid in the war effort against Germany, they still had go through routine marching exercises that included close order drills and marches with backpacks. The extra privileges granted to the Italian service unit members were revoked for any disciplinary infraction. One activity that the members spent hours in doing was brushing their teeth so that they gleamed like pearls. Candace York, she remembers the Germans prisoners of war from Camp Perry on their farm during World War II. She said that Mom made extra food for them and talked to them to try to make them feel at home. They used to sing while they worked on our farm. One of the songs was Lily Marlene. Her mother's name was Lily Ann.
In line with the belief that better international relations can only come through understanding, classes in English language are now being conducted for German prisoners of war at Camp Peary and its branch camps throughout Ohio. Attendance is on a voluntary basis and classes are soon to be enlarged to include as high as 60% of the prisoners. In addition to English, classes have been set up in American history with a prelude in the study and understanding of the American Constitution, in the social sciences as pertains to the way they are practiced in Western civilization, and in the economic geography of America. The education program is one based on simple truths, which is something that, in part, has been missing in the German educational system during the past 12 years. Through this program, Army officials believe the German prisoner of war will come to realize the industrial might and indomitable spirit of the people of the United States of America. There are large numbers of German prisoners of war in the U.S. who will be repatriated someday, and upon their return to Germany will naturally have a part to play in the Reformation Germany. Their opinions concerning America may determine, in a large measure, future relations between Germany and the United States. With this in mind, the German prisoners of war, under the control of Camp Peary and its branch camps at Cleveland, Columbus, Bowling Green, Defiance, Marion, Cambridge, are now afforded the opportunity to grasp a better understanding of America and its institutions. In this way, there will be created voluntary responses on the part of the German prisoners of war which will encourage an attitude of respect on their part for American institutions, traditions, and ways of life and thought.
Italian POWs drinking pop in a canteen at Camp Perry. Canteens had display cases with rings and watches where POWs had coupon books and used coupons to buy items in the canteens. Each prisoner of war was allowed 5 cigarettes a day and 1 bottle of alcohol per man per day. Congressman Alvin Weechel protested the pampering and hero worship of those who killed our boys. It is an insult to the fathers and mothers who gave their sons to the war effort. The War Department is not authorized to use our boys as cannon fodder for the enemy and then make heroes out of the killers.
A favorite of the Italians was coffee soup, a mixture of coffee, milk, cream, and bread that formed a soupy substance relished by the prisoners of war. Another Italian specialty, of course, was spaghetti.
It happened that as I was passing two huge ovens, a prisoner baker opened the door of one oven. The smell was something that cannot be described. I got the prisoner to open the door a couple more times, and sensing my pleasure at the aroma, he grinned. In the oven reopened was a huge piece of pastry. Over it the prisoner was sprinkling cinnamon. The cake must have been fully a yard long and 2 feet wide. That Strauss-Kuchen, that prisoner volunteered, smell good, eh? For a fleeting moment I was tempted to remain behind and become a volunteer prisoner, at least until the kuchen was completely baked and sampled, but I did get a taste of. The newsman found that 3.2 beer was sold at 10 cents per bottle, Coke at 4 cents, cigarettes, they were called spuds, selling at 14 cents, and the New York Times was offered for sale at 4 cents weekdays and 14 cents for Sunday editions. The prisoners apparently don't like American 3.2 beer, it being too light. An enormous amount of Coke is consumed, that product under the same name being also popular in Germany. Profits from the stockade canteens go to benefit the prisoners of war.
Mitchell was one of the most famous reporters in America. He spoke like he was on that telegram. Washington, anyone, I have orders. Who we have signed? Why would have done it? He spoke in this funny nasal voice.
Oh my God, that's exactly what it sounds like.
A radio dispatch from France.
So in any case, when he finds out about the Nazi POW program, Walter Winchell just starts to rant about it.
The United States Army caters to the Nazis as though they were kings. They get more food than our soldiers get. Police, radios, luxuries, and all sorts of leniency beyond imagination.
And he would do this week after week.
We codgers over here won't have any Nazis to capture and fatten up on steaks, butter, ham, and bacon, or chopped chicken liver.
People start writing articles in the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Boston Globe. Citizens start flooding the War Department with letters.
I know, sir, that your YMCA War Prisoners Aid does all it can to make Nazi war prisoners over here comfortable.
And in the
Mail was important for the POWs at Camp Perry, connect with their relatives and family back home. They were always looking forward to mail and sending and receiving it. The POWs at Camp Perry were permitted just one letter and one postcard per week. The letter had to be 24 lines on one side and the postcard 9 lines. POWs always looked forward to receiving mail, but they did have some restrictions on kinds of things they could do with their mail. They could not send maps, sketches, or pictures of themselves. They couldn't have any hidden meaning within their language in the letter, and they had to relate to family or business matters. In their correspondence, there could be no objectionable comments. The prisoners of war were told that certain comments were prohibited in their correspondence. They were, I can write only once a week. We're not permitted to register a complaint. I can only write to close relatives. This is the 7th letter I've written to you from here. You're not permitted to send any photographs.
Dear Edna, I can report with great joy that I received mail from you. For the first time, you can certainly imagine at home how happy I was. I regret I am only able to write a little card, but as soon as possible I will write a letter. Your dear note from the month of December. I thank you again. Greetings, Werner.
This 1944 date hut was established whereby guests were entertained by ISU members. A cafeteria, recreation hall and reception hall was available, plus rooms furnished as close to home as possible. There were 3 smaller rooms for entertaining 1 to 2 guests. Local girls could use these rooms if they had dates, and parents could use them to visit the girls and their dates. Italian prisoners of war, after leaving Camp Perry, worked with civilians on ordnance at the adjacent Erie Proving Ground, including repairing 70% of the large guns used in the war effort. The Erie Proving Ground employed over 5,000 people, including the prisoners of war. The civilians were housed in dormitories on site, and in government provided prefabricated houses in a development called Erie Gardens in Port Clinton. Ohio's base camp was Camp Perry, with branch camps shown in the overview, with 2 hospitals as branch camps and 1 out-of-state branch camp in Fort Wayne, Indiana. The location of the POW camps in Ohio. Most of the camps were in agricultural and small industrial areas, with agriculture having the largest workforce. Ohio General Hospital, military hospital, was dedicated on April 21, 1944, 153 acres/100 buildings, and treated over 15,000 wounded soldiers. On January 19, 1945, a hospital guard shot and killed a German prisoner of war who had threatened him. The guard lost his balance on the icy ground and was rushed by the prisoner he shot. The guard went through a court-martial proceeding and was found not guilty.
General Hospital opened March the 18th, 1943 for general medicine, and was on 255 acres. The focus of the hospital became on orthopedic rehabilitation and the treatment of battle fatigue and shell shock. There were more than 1,400 civilians and military personnel working at the hospital, in addition to the German POWs. The hospital closed on March the 31st, 1946.
AUFAU Camp Perry newspaper was established to communicate to the German prisoners of war camp announcements about religious service times, scores of soccer, chess, and table tennis matches, musical events, movie schedules, puzzle corner, humor page, plus of reflection sections of poems, short stories, POW corner, and editorials repudiating Nazism. The hope was, with the re-education program, that the repatriated prisoners of war would go home and instill the democratic concepts that they learned in class in the rebuilding of Germany's governmental system. Nazi groups within the camps tried to prevent the distribution of the Der RUF newspaper, as is witnessed in signs posted at Camp Perry in March 1945 that read, when translated, "Do Americans believe they can force upon us a newspaper of traitors and deserters? All of you know by now Der RUF. Shall we allow the Cologne and Trier to mock us? Do they want to tell us that we must regain our lost honor? Boycott this shameful newspaper. Washington wants to make an experiment of us. New York Times. But our honor means faith, our belief of Germany. Now more than ever." The Weimar social regulations, 8-hour work days, labor laws, health and old age protections rebuilt Germany to be recognized again. It established etc. Yet, for such democratic achievements, some groups had national goals, defense organizations, to prove to the world that Germany is not beaten militarily. Such organizations facilitated the rise of Hitler and his goals, military rule in Germany and rule over other people. When time comes to reorganize a new Germany, we need to remember who had gotten Germany in the most horrible of all wars. Again, help from other countries to rebuild for the German people, not military goal. Rudolf Jerentrup, Camp Perry.
And in the meantime, according to Thomas Sweet, inside the camp, some of these prisoners are starting to get kind of bold.
For a couple of nights, they cut out swastikas and took a kite and was flying the kite and had these swastikas in a box underneath the kite with the string that down to the ground. And they handed the string to one of the guards and said, "Pull this string." And when they pulled the string, the trap door opened on the gadget they had made, and all these swastikas started falling all over the camp and in Aliceville too, and the townspeople started calling the base mad about that.
Add to that, we don't have enough men to guard a lot of these camps, so the prisoners are starting to get more and more control of the camp.
The prisoners had the run of the camp.
And in some cases, the Nazi hardliners would start to torment the non-Nazis. They would threaten them, they might beat them up. There were even a couple of murders.
Who was not a Nazi inside these camps?
If you had been drafted, but you weren't ideologically.
I see.
So the perception that's coming out of these camps is that we've created these hotels on American soil where Nazis could start radicalizing. And people get so mad that there's actually a congressional investigation into the coddling of prisoners of war.
The story that was seemingly buried beneath the surface about Camp Perry and its branch camps was that some of the prisoner of war camps were significantly contaminated with high levels of toxic waste. It has been revealed that the River Valley Local School District, in Marion County, that the school district unknowing built on old burn pits and toxic waste dumps that were left behind at Branch Camp Marion and the former Marion Engineer Depot grounds and perhaps from Scioto Ordnance Plant, where debris was transported and dumped on the depot side, which may have led to the high cancer rates of the school district students.